The first laugh came from behind the chain-link fence. It was not loud at first, just a little snicker, the kind folks try to hide behind a paper cup and a turned shoulder. But Coach Mabel Price heard it. At 71 years old, Mabel heard everything. She heard the wind moving through the tall pine trees beyond Court 3. She heard the hard pop of the pickleball on plastic. She heard the shuffle of sneakers that were too new to have learned humility. And she heard Derek Sloan, the club's golden boy, tell his partner, "Don't worry. She's just here to hold the clipboard." Mabel stood beside the sideline in her faded white visor, her gray curls tucked under the brim, her knees wrapped in beige sleeves, and her Sunday purse sitting on the bench like it had a right to be there. In one hand she held a small, dry erase board. On it were 3 arrows. One arrow pointed left. One arrow pointed right. One arrow pointed straight down the middle. That was all. Derek looked at the board and smiled, like somebody had brought a church bulletin to a board meeting. "Coach," he said, stretching that word until it bent out of shape. "You sure that's your big strategy?" A few people chuckled. Mabel did not blink. Her player, a nervous woman named Tanya, stood at the baseline with her paddle trembling in her right hand. Sweat had darkened the collar of Tanya's blue t-shirt. Her lips were pressed tight, like she was holding back every doubt she had ever been handed. The score was tied. Tournament final. 1 point left. Match point. Derek rolled the ball across his paddle and looked toward the small crowd. "Everybody ready?" he said. "Let's finish this." Mabel lifted the little whiteboard. She tapped the middle arrow once, not hard, just once. Then she spoke in a voice soft enough that people had to lean in to hear it. "Baby, make him choose what he's been running from." The fence went quiet. Derek's smile thinned. In 4 minutes, every person at Briar Creek Pickleball Club would understand why that old black woman with the worn-out visor had been studying them all day in silence. In 4 minutes, the man who laughed at her arrows would be staring at that whiteboard like it had read his whole life out loud. And in 4 minutes, Mabel Price would prove that wisdom does not always enter a room wearing a name badge. But before that ball crossed the net, before the crowd rose to its feet, before Derek Sloan's face lost all its shine, you need to know how Mabel got there. And if you have ever been underestimated because your hair turned silver, because your shoes were old, because your hands looked like they had worked for a living, go ahead and subscribe. Stay with this one. Then tell me in the comments where you are listening from, because somebody in your city has been carrying quiet greatness too. Now let us rewind to that morning. Mabel arrived at Briar Creek before the gates were fully open. The sun was still low, throwing gold light across the courts and making the nets look like black ribbons stretched tight against the day. The club sat on the clean side of town, behind a stone sign and a row of trimmed hedges that got more attention than some people's front yards. Mabel came through the side entrance, not the main one. That was where the staff usually came in. She did not complain about it. She had lived long enough to know that some doors were built to tell you who people thought you were. She had also lived long enough not to believe every door. Her canvas tote bumped against her hip as she walked. Inside it were 2 bottles of water, a towel washed thin from years of use, a banana wrapped in a napkin, and that little whiteboard with the 3 arrows already drawn. The board was old. The corners were chipped. A faint ghost of old marker lines lived under the new ones, no matter how hard she scrubbed it clean. Mabel had found it years ago in a church basement, tossed beside a broken folding chair after vacation Bible school. She had kept it. Useful things deserved a second life. At the registration table, a young volunteer looked up from a tablet. "Name?" "Mabel Price." The volunteer scrolled. "Are you here for the senior social clinic?" "No, ma'am. I'm here with Tanya Bell, women's doubles open bracket." The volunteer paused. Her eyes moved over Mabel's visor, her soft brown hands, her sensible white sneakers, her tote bag, her knees. Then she looked back at the tablet. "Oh," she said. "You're the coach." Mabel gave a small smile. That's what Tanya calls
Before
me.
the volunteer could answer, Derek Sloan walked up behind them carrying 2 paddles and a smoothie the color of wet grass. He was tall, handsome in a polished kind of way, with a watch that caught the sun and a shirt that looked like it had sponsors even when it did not. He glanced at Mabel, then at the tote bag. "Morning," he said. "You lost, ma'am?"
The beginner clinic is on court 7. The volunteer froze. Mabel turned slowly. "No, baby," she said. "I know exactly where I am." Derek smiled, but not kindly. "Fair enough." He leaned over the table and signed in with a flourish, like even his signature expected applause. Mabel watched him go. She did not know his whole story yet. She only knew the shape of him. Men like Derek did not always start cruel. Sometimes they started scared. Sometimes they learned to polish fear until it looked like confidence. Sometimes they laughed first, so nobody would notice their hands shaking later. Tanya hurried across the walkway a minute after that, breathing hard, paddle bag bouncing against her shoulder. "Coach Mabel, I'm sorry. My bus was late and then the transfer—" Mabel touched her arm. "You're here." Tanya swallowed. "He saw me warming up yesterday. Derek. He told somebody I hit like I was apologizing." Mabel looked toward the courts. "Then today, stop apologizing." Tanya gave a weak laugh. "I don't know if I can beat women who train here every week." Mabel reached into her tote and pulled out the whiteboard. 3 arrows waited there in black marker. Left, right, middle. Tanya frowned. "That's it?" Mabel's eyes stayed gentle. "That's enough for now." Across the courts, Derek glanced over and smirked. The day had not even begun, and already the world had decided what Mabel was worth. That was the world's first mistake. Mabel Price had not planned on becoming anybody's pickleball coach. Most of her life she had been called other things first: cashier, lunch lady, church kitchen captain, widow. That nice lady who always brought foil-covered pans when somebody's family was grieving. She lived in a small duplex on the east side of town, where the porch boards dipped in the middle and the mailbox leaned like it had worked a double shift. Her couch wore a fitted sheet because the brown fabric underneath had split at the seams. Her kitchen table had one chair that wobbled unless you tucked a folded church program under the short leg. She drank her morning coffee from a mug that said, "Best vacation ever," though Mabel had never been on the vacation it came from. Mabel used what life handed her. She made one rotisserie chicken stretch from Sunday dinner to Wednesday soup. She kept grocery bags folded inside other grocery bags. She washed aluminum foil and let it dry by the sink. There was nothing shameful in that. Waste was for people who had never opened a refrigerator and prayed over what was left. On her bedroom wall hung one framed photograph of her late mother, Lily May, standing outside Mount Zion Baptist in a cream hat and gloves. Lily May had been small, but she could fill a room without raising her voice. When Mabel was young and angry over some slight at school, some teacher who saw her as slow before seeing her as quiet, Lily May would sit her down on the back steps and say, "Child, never let a fool make you perform your worth like a circus trick. Let your work speak when the room gets tired of lying." Mabel had carried that sentence longer than she had carried most friendships. She carried it through a marriage that was tender until sickness made it short. She carried it through a job at the middle school cafeteria, where she learned which children were hungry before they said so. She carried it through years of people speaking around her, over her, past her, like gray hair had turned her invisible. Pickleball came to her late. It started in the church gym on rainy Tuesdays when the seniors needed something to do after Bible study besides talk about everybody's blood pressure. Somebody donated a cracked net. Somebody else brought paddles from a yard sale. Mabel watched from a folding chair at first, her hands wrapped around a foam cup of lemonade. She liked the sound. Pop, step, pop, pause. It was like music with little arguments in it. After a few weeks, she began noticing things. Brother Ellis always leaned too far before hitting cross court. Sister Rowena never returned down the middle when she was nervous.
Deacon Paul acted relaxed right before he tried to show off. Mabel did not say much. She just watched. One Tuesday, after Sister Rowena lost 3 games and blamed her paddle, Mabel took a dry erase board from the church supply closet and drew 3 arrows on it. "Try this," she said. Sister Rowena squinted. "Mabel, that looks like directions to the restroom." "Maybe it is," Mabel said. "Maybe it will lead you out of trouble." Everybody laughed, but Sister Rowena tried it. She won the next game 11-4. After that, people started asking Mabel what she saw. She never made it fancy. She did not talk like the videos online. She did not say terms just to prove she knew them. She watched feet. She watched shoulders. She watched who avoided the middle of the court when pressure came knocking. She saw fear before the player knew it had entered. The whiteboard came home with her every week. She cleaned it with rubbing alcohol when the markers stained. He kept it beside her Bible and her pill organizer. Sometimes, late at night, when the duplex was quiet and the streetlight striped the wall through the blinds, she would draw arrows and circles and little X marks, then wipe them away. Not because anybody was paying her, not because anybody was watching, because seeing clearly was a gift, and gifts got rusty when you left them unused. Tanya Bell found Mabel at Mount Zion that spring. Tanya was 46, a home health aide with tired feet and a laugh that came out stronger when she forgot to be afraid. She had taken up pickleball after her doctor told her stress was chewing her alive. At the public park, she was quick, steady, and kind. At Briar Creek, where she had been invited by a coworker, she turned small. Those courts did that to people. They had umbrellas over the benches, chilled towels, and a silver bin, and members who could make a person feel poor without mentioning money. Tanya had almost quit after her first week. Then she saw Mabel coaching 2 church ladies on a cracked court behind Mount Zion. No uniform, no whistle. Just that visor, that calm voice, and that old whiteboard. "Can you teach me?" Tanya had asked. Mabel studied her for a moment. "I can show you what I see," she said. "But you have to believe it when you see it too." So they worked. Not every day. Tanya had shifts. Mabel had knees that argued with the weather. They practiced when they could, mostly early mornings at the public park before the heat rose off the pavement. Mabel packed water and reused juice bottles. Tanya brought dollar store grip tape. They chased balls that rolled under benches. They played through wind, gnats, and the smell of cut grass. Mabel never promised Tanya she would be the strongest player. She promised her something better. "You're going to stop giving people permission to rush you," Mabel said. Now, standing at Briar Creek with the tournament beginning, Tanya looked at the bright courts and the clean benches and the players in matching outfits. Her shoulders crept upward. Mabel saw it. She touched the whiteboard with 2 fingers. "Remember," she said. "Left, right, middle. Don't chase noise. Read the room." Tanya nodded. Across the walkway, Derek laughed at something one of the men said. Mabel heard that too. She only closed her tote, lifted her chin, and walked toward Court 3. Court 3 had a way of making ordinary mistakes feel expensive. At the public park, if Tanya missed a return, somebody might say, "Shake it off," and roll the ball back with a smile. At Briar Creek, people looked away in a way that somehow felt louder than speaking. They adjusted sunglasses. They checked phones. They gave little nods that said, "That is about what we expected." Mabel sat on the bench with her tote at her feet. She did not pace. She did not clap after every shot just to fill the air. She watched. Tanya's first match started rough. Her opponent hit hard through the middle, and Tanya kept drifting left, then right, then late, as if the court were asking questions faster than she could answer them. Mabel waited until Tanya turned toward her. Then Mabel raised the whiteboard. She pointed to the arrow straight down the middle. Tanya took one breath. On the next rally, she stopped chasing the sideline. She held her ground. She let the ball come into her space and blocked it low, right between the 2 players across the net. They both moved, neither committed. The ball skipped past them. Tanya blinked like she had found a key under a mat. Mabel nodded once. Do it again. Tanya did. By the end of that match, the same people who had looked away were leaning forward. Tanya won, 11-8. Not with power, not with flash, but with patience, sharp enough to cut twine. Afterward, Tanya ran to Mabel with her face shining. "Coach, did you see that?" "I saw you stop borrowing other folks' panic," Mabel said. Tanya laughed, and for a moment the tournament felt almost kind. Then Derek walked by. "Nice little win," he said. "Everybody gets one." Tanya's smile faded. Mabel turned her head. "Morning still young?" she said. Derek tapped his paddle against his palm. "I respect confidence," he said. "I just hope nobody's filling her head with fairy tales. This place gets serious after lunch." He looked at the whiteboard again. "Arrows won't save you when the ball comes fast." Mabel studied him. There it was. Not just arrogance, protection. Derek had built himself out of shine because somewhere underneath it, there was a man terrified of being ordinary. Mabel learned more as the day moved on. She heard it in pieces. A man near the water cooler said Derek used to coach tennis at a private academy before pickleball got popular. Another said he had lost a sponsorship the year before, after choking in a regional final. Somebody else whispered that Derek had not spoken to his old doubles partners since then. Mabel did not need gossip to understand the shape of a wound. Derek wanted every point to prove he was still the man people clapped for. Every hard shot said, "Look at me." Every smirk said, "Don't look too close." That kind of man was dangerous on a court. Not because he was fearless, because he was not. Tanya's second match was harder. Her legs slowed. Her serve tightened. A woman in a white skirt kept dropping soft balls over the net, making Tanya run forward, then lobbing over her shoulder. By the time Tanya came to the bench, she was breathing with her whole chest. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. Mabel handed her the reused juice bottle filled with ice water. "You can't keep doing what they tell you to do," she said. "So stop." Tanya looked lost. Mabel wiped the whiteboard with her towel and redrew the same 3 arrows. Left, right, middle. "Everybody here thinks moving you is the same as beating you," Mabel said. "Make them move first." Tanya stared at the board. "Through the middle? Through the truth," Mabel said. Tanya went back out. This time she did not sprint at every invitation. She waited. She lifted the ball deep. She let her opponent come forward, then put the next shot at her feet. It was not pretty. It was better than pretty. It worked. Tanya won again. By mid-afternoon, the story around Court 3 had changed. People still did not know what to call Mabel, but they had stopped calling her lost. They watched her now, not kindly, exactly, curiously. That was how respect sometimes entered a room when pride was blocking the front door. It slipped in sideways. The final bracket posted at 3 o'clock. Tanya Bell versus Derek Sloan and his partner. Tanya read the names and went still. "I thought it was women's doubles all the way." The volunteer at the table looked embarrassed. "Open final. Mixed substitutions after semifinals. It's in the rules packet." Tanya turns to Mabel. "I didn't know." "I did," Mabel said gently. Tanya's eyes widened. "And you still let me play?" "I helped you play." Across the patio, Derek spread his arms like the day had finally arranged itself correctly. "Well, well," he called. "Looks like we get the church clinic championship." His partner laughed. A few others laughed too, though softer now. Tanya's face tightened. Mabel stood. She was not tall, but something about her rising made the bench area feel smaller. Derek saw it and grinned wider, pushing harder because he needed the old woman to shrink. "Tell you what, coach," he said. "After we win, I'll autograph your little board." The court went quiet enough to hear a flag rope tapping against a pole. Mabel held the whiteboard against her chest. For 1 second, she saw her mother on those back steps years ago, gloves folded in her lap, eyes steady as sunrise. Let your work speak when the room gets tired of lying.
Mabel stepped closer to the fence. "No need," she said. "It already knows your name." Derek's grin flickered. Just a flicker. But Mabel saw it. Tanya saw Mabel see it. And for the first time all day, Tanya did not look afraid. The final drew people from every court. Players who had already lost came carrying water bottles and folded towels. Club members lined the fence. The volunteer from registration stood near the gate with the tablet pressed against her chest, no longer pretending she was not interested. Derek loved a crowd. He bounced on the balls of his feet. He rolled his shoulders. He called out jokes to men near the patio and slapped hands through the fence. His partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, kept her face serious and her paddle ready. Tanya stood beside Mabel at the bench. Her fingers opened and closed around the handle of her paddle. "I'm not scared," she said. Mabel looked at her. Tanya swallowed. "I mean, I am, but I'm still here." "That's the only kind of courage most of us ever get," Mabel said. The match began with Derek serving hard, too hard. The ball came low and fast, and Tanya blocked it into the net. 1-0, Derek called. He did not just say the score. He announced it. The next point went the same way, then another. Derek kept driving the ball at Tanya's body, forcing rushed hands and cramped returns. Claire cleaned up anything that floated. 3-0. 4-0. At the fence, the Snickers returned. Not as many this time, but enough. Tanya came back to the bench at the side switch, with her jaw tight. "He's coming right at me," she said. "Yes." "I can't out-hit him." "No." Tanya stared at her. Mabel lifted the whiteboard. "Left, right, middle." "What do you see?" Mabel asked. Tanya looked at the arrows, frustrated. "I see 3 arrows." "That's what he sees too," Mabel said. "That's why he's laughing." Tanya breathed hard. Mabel tilted the board toward the court. "Watch his feet after he hits, not the ball." His feet. Play resumed. Derek served. Tanya returned deep. Derek stepped around the ball and slammed a forehand toward the sideline. The crowd made a pleased sound. Point. 5-0. Mabel did not move. The next rally lasted longer. Tanya returned middle. Claire reached for it, but Derek lunged too, and for 1/2 second, both of them crowded the same space. Their paddles nearly touched. Claire pulled away. Derek took the shot late and sent it long. A small murmur moved along the fence. Mabel tapped the middle arrow. Tanya saw it. On the next serve, she sent the return low and plain down the center line. Not fancy, not pretty. True. Derek shouted, "Mine!" But Claire had already stepped in. They hesitated. The ball slipped between them. 5-2. Derek's smile stiffened. Claire turned to him. "You said you had middle." "I did." "Then take it." He served again, harder now. Tanya blocked left. Claire volleyed cross-court. Tanya reset. Derek tried to speed it up, but Tanya did not answer fast with fast. She softened the ball into the kitchen, then sent the next one straight through the middle. Again, both opponents moved. Again, neither trusted the other. 5-3. Mabel remembered Sister Rowena in the church gym, fussing about her paddle while standing 2 steps from the answer. She remembered Brother Ellis leaning before he knew he was leaning. She remembered Deacon Paul showing off right before he gave away the point. People told on themselves before the ball did. By the time the score reached 8-8, Derek had stopped joking. Sweat darkened his collar. His watch no longer caught the sun because his wrist stayed low. He glared at the center line like it had betrayed him. Claire was angry now too, but her anger was clean. He wanted order. Derek wanted control. Those were not the same thing. At 10-9, Derek had match point. The crowd pressed close. That was the moment from the beginning. The first laugh came again from behind the fence, weaker than before, but still there, trying to survive. Derek rolled the ball across his paddle. "Everybody ready?" he said. "Let's finish this." Mabel rose from the bench. Her knees complained, but she rose anyway. Tanya looked over.
Mabel lifted the little whiteboard with its chipped corners and ghost lines under the marker. She tapped the middle arrow once. "Baby," she said, "make him choose what he's been running from." The words crossed the court softer than wind. Derek heard them.
His face changed. Not much, just enough. For 1 second, the polished man disappeared, and Mabel saw the player from that lost regional final people had whispered about. The man who did not trust a partner anymore. The man who would rather take every ball than risk needing somebody. He served. Tanya returned, deep. Claire drove the third shot low. Tanya reset it, soft. Derek stepped in, hungry to end it. The ball rose just enough for him to attack, and he fired at Tanya's right hip. Tanya did not panic. She turned her paddle face open and absorbed the shot. The ball dropped over the net slow and low. Derek rushed forward. Claire rushed too. Tanya waited. 1 breath. 2. Then she sent the next ball straight down the middle. The whole court seemed to narrow to that white line. Derek shouted, "Mine!" Claire shouted, "I've got it!" They both stepped in. They both stopped. Derek, refusing to yield, reached across his own partner and jabbed late. The ball popped up high, weak, helpless against the afternoon sun. Tanya moved forward and placed it gently at his feet. Not a smash, not a show, just a final answer. The ball bounced once, then twice. Silence took the club by the throat. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the fence erupted. Tanya covered her mouth with both hands. Claire stared at Derek, stunned. Derek looked from the ball to the center line, then to Mabel's whiteboard. Left, right, middle. 3 arrows. The little board he had mocked had drawn a map of the place he trusted least. And Mabel Price, standing in her faded visor with her Sunday purse on the bench, had seen it before he did. 11-9, she called. Game and match. Tanya Bell. For a second, Tanya did not move. Then, sound found her. Hands clapped against the fence. Somebody shouted her name. A woman from the morning bracket threw both arms in the air. Even folks who had laughed earlier were standing now, trying to act like they had always known. Tanya turned toward Mabel. Not the crowd. Not Derek. Mabel. Her eyes were wet and her smile shook at the corners. She walked to the sideline like her legs had forgotten they were tired, and Mabel opened her arms before Tanya reached her. "You did it," Tanya whispered. Mabel held her close for 1 breath. "No, baby," she said. "You finally trusted what you already had." That was when Derek came across the court. The clapping softened. Claire stayed back, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Derek held his paddle at his side. The shine had gone out of him, and without it, he looked younger somehow. Not kinder yet, just exposed. He stopped in front of Mabel. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then he looked at the whiteboard. "Guess those arrows worked," he said. It could have been a joke. It could have been a door. Mabel chose the door. "They told the truth," she said. "That's all." Derek swallowed. His eyes shifted toward Tanya, then down to the court. "I shouldn't have talked the way I did." Tanya stood straighter, still breathing hard. "No," she said. "You shouldn't have." The crowd went quiet again, waiting to see if Mabel would finish him, waiting for a sharp word, waiting for the kind of payback people understand because it makes noise. Mabel did not give it to them. She had spent too many years being treated small to make herself big by shrinking somebody else. She tucked the whiteboard under one arm. "Mr. Sloan," she said, "a court will show you where you don't trust people. Life does the same thing. You can keep blaming the middle, or you can learn to share it." Derek's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Maybe because there was nothing left to win in arguing. Maybe because, for the first time that day, he had heard. Claire stepped forward then and held out a hand to Tanya. "Good match," she said. Tanya shook it. "Good match." Then Claire looked at Mabel. You saw that from the beginning? Mabel smiled faintly. I saw enough. The registration volunteer came over next, clutching a small envelope and a plastic trophy that looked like a silver pickleball balanced on a cup. Miss Bell, she said, congratulations. Tanya took the trophy like it might disappear if she held it too loosely. Then the volunteer turned to Mabel. And Coach Price, she added, softer now, with respect finding its way into her voice. Would you mind writing your name down for us? We host clinics every month. Some of our members might want coaching. Mabel looked at the same young woman who had doubted her at sunrise. Not cruelly, just fully. I can write it down, she said. But I still come through the front gate next time. The volunteer's face flushed. Yes, ma'am, she said. Of course. Mabel nodded once, as if that settled more than a gate. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the sun leaned low behind the pines, Mabel and Tanya sat on the bench beside Court 3. The trophy rested between them. Mabel's Sunday purse sat on the other side, calm as ever, like it had known all along. Tanya ran her thumb over the little silver ball. You think they'll remember this? She asked. Mabel wiped the whiteboard with the edge of her towel. The arrows faded into gray streaks, but not completely. They never did. Some will remember the point, Mabel said. Some will remember being wrong. Some will forget by supper. Tanya looked at her. And you? Mabel glanced at the clean court, the center line, the place where fear had stumbled and truth had walked straight through. I'll remember you didn't swing angry, she said. That matters. Tanya smiled. Mabel slipped the whiteboard back into her tote. Its corners were still chipped. Its surface was still stained. It looked like nothing special to anybody who needed special things to glitter. But it had carried church gym lessons, late-night study, public park mornings, and one match point where a woman who had been overlooked helped another woman stand tall. Worth does not always arrive with volume. Sometimes it sits on a bench in a faded visor, watching quietly until the moment comes. Sometimes it draws 3 plain arrows and waits for the room to catch up. And sometimes, when the laugh dies down and the truth finally lands, the person everyone dismissed does not have to announce who they are. The work says it. If this story touched something in you, leave one word in the comments. Seen. And next time, we'll meet a cafeteria worker whose recipe card exposed the lie inside a City Hall banquet.